This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 871, recorded on Wednesday, April 13th, 2022. Can the internet handle this science? I don't know if it can, but I'm Dr. Kiki, and today we'll fill your head with brains, leeches, and heart. But first, thanks to our amazing Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Disclaimer. In the past, we have looked to the future, waiting around in presence past, planning and procrastinating, predicting and anticipating, all in expectation that one day the future would arrive. And wouldn't you know it, the future is here. In fact, the future might even be here ahead of schedule, because from the looks of it, we aren't ready for it. Case in point, an autonomous vehicle was pulled over this week. The vehicle had apparently failed to put on its lights while driving at night. The police approached the car and it sped off, only to come to a stop a little further ahead in what the vehicle might have considered a safer location. When police approached the vehicle for a second time, they immediately lacked any protocol on how to proceed with the traffic stop. They couldn't demand a license or registration. They couldn't ask the car if it had been drinking, or even ask it to roll down its window so that they could turn on its lights. They tried to open the door, but it was locked. In short, the future happened, and nobody was prepared for it, making us look very much not like the people of the future, but people of the past who somehow stuck around too long. While there are plenty of examples of how stuck in the past we are as a planet, the oil economy, authoritarian autocracies, racial inequality, income inequality, gender inequality, matching socks, all relics of bygone eras, the future always happens this way. Nobody is ever ready for it. Not really. It just happens, week by week, day by day, slowly and methodically, until before we know it, we find ourselves listening to yet another episode of This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. I feel like going down like a Friday the 13th rabbit hole, but it's only Wednesday the 13th, so I guess
You'll get a Friday the 13th next month.
Awesome! Okay.
Yeah.
Look who's tracking Friday the 13th.
Blair just knows.
Calendars a lot. I just learned these things.
Oh, well, I'm glad that you keep track of these things, Blair, so that we all know when we can look forward to Friday the 13th.
And for the record, I think you're a very good witch. You're not like one of the bad ones. Yeah.
Good.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch? A witch?
Or a sandwich.
No, you're an Earl of Sandwich? I am so confused. Let's talk about
We're
science.
still trying to get the sand through the minute hourglass thing that you did
That
earlier.
was pretty good for your disclaimer. It was very apropos of our sands through an hourglass conversation.
All right. The show tonight, we have science stories, lots of science news, as always, bringing you the good stuff. We have stories from me about plant protection in the rain, lightning life, and scientific skepticism. Might also talk about some baby brains. What do you have, Justin?
I've got an abstract brain, energetic bacteria, ancient Chinese secrets, and getting high with space balloons.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Blair, can you top that in the animal corner?
Oh, man. I have blood-sucking leeches.
Well, that'll do it. All
I
right.
have a pod of porpoises, and I have intelligent primates that aren't just us.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, us, right? Obviously.
Humans don't belong in the animal corner. Get them out of there. So the rest of the
I think my abstract thinking story is going to have the opposite conclusion of your animal corner story. It's kind of fun. Yeah.
It's all linked together. It's all connected. It's all connected. All right. As we jump into the show, I want you to connect with our podcast. If you haven't yet subscribed to us online, you can find us all places that podcasts are found. Look for This Week in Science in your favorite podcast platform. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. We do broadcast live 8 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday evenings. Look for This Week in Science or TWIS Science on Twitch. We're also TWIS Science on Twitter and Instagram. If all this is too confusing, you can find the links, show notes, and so much more at twis.org. Let's get into the science that will break the internet. Okay. This last week, 2 stories, 2, not 1, but 2 stories made me just go,
oh no. Oh geez. Oh gosh.
Is it bunk science or bunk reporting?
It's bunk reporting.
Okay, let's hear it.
If people are reporting if people are reading in the right places, which are very science audience focused, so really focused at people who are probably scientists, then they're probably getting all the information. But if you're grabbing stuff out of the headlines from the BuzzFeed type listicles and that kind of stuff, it's not necessarily going to be giving you the accurate interpretation of what's going on. So, 2 big stories out this week we need to look at with a little bit of skepticism and wait for more interpretation to come out. But yes, we can be excited about the stories as they're happening. Just be realistic, people. That's all. Can we just be realistic?
Wait a second. What is this story? Don't tell me that coffee actually doesn't cure cancer, because this is I don't want to know that one.
No, that's not what I'm going to tell you about today.
Chocolate isn't good for diabetes. Come on, Kiki. Just don't tell me the hard news.
First, I want to talk about some heavy W bosons. These bosons have been investigated by Fermilab for quite some time, and they've got a massive amount of data that they have been number crunching to try and figure out what's going on with the W boson. So we've got all these subatomic particles, and this out of Fermi is actually reported in the journal Science. So, Science, it's a very reputable journal. They've got data. It's not the final word yet, but so the W boson, it's got extra weight that was unexpected and could, based on all these analyses, could possibly mean that there's something wrong with the standard model of physics. So far, though, everything seems to be lining up in all the other experimental realms with the standard model of physics. So it would be a massive adjustment for us to go, hey, the W boson, it isn't the mass that we thought it was going to be. And that's what the data suggests from this particular study, with a very high amount of statistical significance, mind you, 7 sigma, which is really significant in terms of the way that physicists look at their data. But there's another experiment at the Large Hadron Collider that has been measuring the W boson's mass, and it did not find data like this. It was only very, very slightly heavier than what was expected. So they just kind of the error that was involved would have been fine. So now this Fermilab experiment is like way away from what the Atlas experiment found back in 2017. And so there's a discrepancy between the experiments. There's a discrepancy between the data. Researchers, of course, are going to be going back now to the ATLAS experiment, Large Hadron Collider data, and looking for more data. Looking to find other subatomic particle deteriorations that might show these W bosons and give us more information as to whether or not they are deviating from what we expected.
Well, so this is why replicability is so important, right? Because
Yeah.
you could have consistent results over and over from the same source with the
Yes.
same methodology, with the same researchers doing the experiment. And that sounds really good, but you have to then do that somewhere else with different instruments, with different people. And
Yep.
that's where you start to go, okay, is there something wrong with my instrument? Is there some sort of confounding background noise I'm dealing with? That's very interesting. And so the sensational headline was the standard model's ruined, basically.
Yeah. This new
Okay.
particle it's breaking physics.
Okay,
Physics is
got
broken.
Got it.
Hey, headlines.
Mhm.
Physics it's not broken. Our physics, it still works very well. But there is an interesting finding, very significant.
Mhm.
Fermilab and the people who work in this collaboration, they also collaborate with Atlas people, and there's a whole lot of work going on. But there are people within the community who would really like to see this Fermi data stand up to scrutiny because it could potentially fill in some holes related to some other experiments that have been ongoing. So there's a G2 experiment, the muon G2 anomaly, that also doesn't kind of fit with the standard model. And this could potentially fix that. I don't know. So there are some explanations. What this means, though, is that right now there are physicists doing lots of theoretical calculating and writing papers, coming up with a lot of ideas. And there's going to be more number crunching, more experimenting.
Mhm.
It's not a final answer. And that is, always where we want to be in science, right? It's not, we're in the process. We're
Yeah.
in the process. The standard
Science is
model,
never done.
no. And it would be kind of cool if something like supersymmetry finally had a bit of support.
No, please, no oxygen to that room. None. Just everybody needs to steer away when you're getting to choose which path you choose early on in your life as a physics Jedi. Stay away from
What
that.
do you choose? Well, it's not like
Well,
the
but
physics Jedi. And I mean, we're gonna mix like the Matrix and the Jedi. It's like, which
yeah,
one
it's
do
all
you
good.
choose? I
But
don't know.
what it sounds like too is it's like an accuracy versus precision kind of a situation. Like
Yeah.
if you've got one lab that's like, hey, we can verify our results because we get the same result every time. That could just be that their instrument's very precise and it's looking at the same thing in the same way with every setting in the viewing
Yes.
machinery or whatever. And somebody else is getting a different result. It could just be that that's how their equipment is set up. So that could be the methodology of looking at it. It's always the thing with you're talking about reproducibility in science.
Yeah.
It's also tough because different labs may be working with different conditions completely. Even in an animal study, the temperature of the room in one lab is kept high and it's kept low somewhere else. So they're getting different results from the mice or whatever the thing is. Then you just have to figure out which one's actually accurate. Okay, we both have precise equipment that can can measure the same thing that the same way we've measured it before, but they don't match. So somebody's actual
Is off.
accuracy is off. And
Yeah.
so that's when you've got to delve
Yeah.
into figuring out.
Yeah. So
And
I
on
mean,
this
we'll
level,
see. There's fun stuff happening.
the subatomic level, I don't even know how you begin to address accuracy versus
Yeah.
precision.
I mean, this is all, we talk about subatomic particles, but really what is being measured across the board is energy, right? Is like the amount of energy at a certain frequency. And so it's like, okay, we have this energetic signal here, this energetic signal here, this happening. And so
Mm.
it's a bunch of inferring that's going on. And so this W boson, there may be another particle involved that we don't know about. There could, I mean, it opens up all sorts of interesting possibilities, but I don't know. The case is not closed. Regardless, physics isn't broken.
No.
You know, you can tell things still drop.
Yeah, I mean, for the
We're
average
not
Joe,
floating.
gravity's working. I mean, my table is still
For
something
now.
I can't put my hand through unless I
For
really want
now.
to work on my kung fu.
But that's the thing. We got to keep an eye on it. That's how we keep gravity working.
That's right.
So-
Keep an
As
eye
soon
on it.
as
Right.
you
Keep
stop,
observing.
you stop believing in
Permanent.
it. It's like fairies, right?
No.
Stop believing in it, it goes away.
That's right. Oh my
Turns out
gosh.
this
One
week,
day in the
scientists
future,
proved-
people will stop believing in gravity and then things are just going to start floating off the planet randomly. The planets aren't going to stay in orbit around the sun anymore. And everybody's like, what's going on? It's like, we're having a problem with the lack of gravity. And then you'll have to do a movie and somebody will have to find Santa. And
And you'll have to clap for the fairies.
yeah, and there'll be the power meter. Oh, everyone believes.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about the dinosaurs?
Yes. Okay. So the second study that was a really, really big thing isn't even a published
A
study.
thing.
So the
Okay.
first story that we just talked about, published in Science, peer reviewed, real data, like it's good. Okay. This that has been making the rounds of all of the headlines and everyone's very excited about it. It has to do with the Tanis fossil beds. And Justin, do you remember the whole story about the upwelling that occurred after the dinosaur killing asteroid event that
Mhm.
pushed a whole bunch of water and mud and all sorts of stuff up to the Dakotas and ended up in this Tanis fossil site that is all this mishmash of like fish all over the place and these
Yeah.
beads of the heated glass that are stuck in their
Molten glass
gills.
raining from the sky.
Yeah, and so this story is like this wonderful, incredible, this story that has so many details. These researchers have been really taking this site apart and finding all sorts of stuff. Well, they have a documentary coming out with David Attenborough. And so there's marketing happening right now. And it's not
Hmm.
there's no paper out. They've done a few papers that were peer reviewed, but what they are talking about right now is a dinosaur leg that was found. It's like a bird-like dinosaur, an early ancestor of birds. Its leg, no body, just a leg that was found in the correct orientation and no, it didn't look like anybody had eaten it. So it just looked like it had been ripped off of some poor ancient dinosaur and embedded in the sediment in the process of this incredible impact event that killed the dinosaurs. And so what they're saying is that this preserved leg is proof of all of this happening on this day. And this is a piece of evidence. It's a dinosaur who died on that day of impact.
Hmm.
That's the thing I have an issue with. And I'm not a paleontologist, I'm not an archaeologist, but the pros have also said they take issue with a lot of this because there are a lot of details that are still not fully understood, and this is a media tour, and it's a lot. This whole thing has been science through media first and then the papers after. And it's
Yeah.
it's
This is tough for
yeah.
me because so much of paleontology, when you look at it, it's like one little bone. The Quetzalcoatlus keeps coming to mind that like they found like one little piece of a wing and they're like, it's a giant pterodactyl. Like what? So I know there's more science behind it. I know that it is way more complicated to that. But from the outside looking in, often I feel like it just looks like they get one little bone and they're like, all right, from this bone, we know it's an herbivore. We know how big it is. We know what the rest of its body looked like, right? So I could see how as a untrained reader being told they found a leg and finding all this information from it tracks, actually. And so I could see how this could totally get out of control, and people would believe it without understanding how specific all of that stuff has to be and how much other research goes on in the background to turn one bone into a fossil and into a story. So it's tough.
I don't know. I think it's a fun narrative, though, and they are doing storytelling. They're not doing science. They're doing,
but I mean, they're doing this, and that's the thing. The storytelling is awesome, but they're putting it forward. They are doing science, but they're putting story before science, as opposed to the other way around, where a lot of scientists, the majority of scientists, really make sure they have their details figured out before they go out and tell that story. They have peer review. They make sure that everything's been double checked.
And could this dinosaur have been there witnessing that day? Like, there'll be a slight caveat, and then you'll just go past and it'll be fine.
Yeah, the very slight caveat, but the rest of it is going to be the storytelling, right? And that investigation. And I mean, I think it is this particular surge deposit in North Dakota and Montana. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so full of stuff. And the story, I mean, it's amazing that the forensics, you're able to go through and get all this stuff. But now they're saying that they have a piece of the, or pieces, evidence of the asteroid itself. They've got bits and pieces of it, which still hasn't been published. They're talking about this dinosaur leg and how it is evidence of this dinosaur is evidence, still hasn't been published. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is still lacking, that hasn't been peer reviewed, but that they have been traveling around. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't know if this is unfortunate or fortunate, because they're giving talks, which scientists do all the time. However, one of the researchers went to NASA Goddard Space Flight Center this last week, and a researcher who I know there, who's a cosmologist, she's like, oh my gosh, this is like the thing, this is it. And she's talking about how the emotional response of the scientists who were there, hearing the story and seeing these bits of evidence that were brought to Goddard. And I want to cry foul because they are touring the evidence around before the evidence has really been picked apart. And so that's all I'm going to say. So please, everyone, enjoy Dinosaurs: The Final Day with Sir David Attenborough on BBC One. It'll also be on Nova and on PBS in the United States. But enjoy this story. But if you're watching this show, if you're listening to this podcast, please hear me and be skeptical. Don't just dive into the narrative and accept it all as fact, because it hasn't all been published.
I mean, this is ultimately the problem with trying to communicate science in the age of the internet.
Yeah.
Is that the internet and social media and all of it,
the whole media
so fast.
Environment. Yeah.
You have the opportunity to reach people immediately, but science takes time to be done properly. And so there is a disconnect, right? So how do you get in front of misinformation? How do you wait long enough to give the whole story without losing your moment? It's a lot of push-pulls, and especially, in these cases, there was nobody trying to fight the science. But when you are specifically dealing with intentional misinformation, how do you wait long enough to be correct, the most correct, while also battling misinformation? It's a huge problem that we're currently dealing with, and I don't have an answer other than to do it right.
That's what we try to do. So that's why I thought it was important to put on the skeptic hat at the beginning. I'm a scientist, right? I don't consider myself just a skeptic. I'm a scientist, but you gotta put on that scientific skepticism every once in a while. Enjoy the story, enjoy the narrative, but grain of salt.
Hey, Kiki.
Hey,
what kind
Justin.
of science did you study?
I studied brain science.
Good, because that's going to come in handy because I have no idea what this next story is about. So,
Ah!
according to this, the according to this, the human brain is organized into functional networks, which is not something I was terribly aware of. It says connected brain regions that communicate with each other through dedicated pathways are considered functional networks. This is we have one for senses, I guess, the motor system, how we move around. There's memory is involved in its own functional network. It says here the default mode network is the part of our connected brain that is responsible for abstract and self-directed thought. When we process external sensory information, the default network turns off. And when there's less going on outside of our bodies, when our senses aren't super engaged, it turns on. So I'm sort of thinking like, this is the part of your brain that's working when you're reading or meditating or contemplating, maybe, I don't know what to do with the rest of your existence. So the human default mode network engaged in rest and cognitive states, such as the self-directed thoughts. So it sounds like a focused, thinky part of the brain. Right? Is that would you support that analogy? That it's a very focused, thinky part of the brain.
Thinky.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So we got this focused.
Yeah, it's putting a whole bunch of different kinds of parts of the brain together.
Yeah. So, and it's the part I think that in humans is giving us that sentient glint in our eye when we're doing nothing, when we're like staring at a book, but we still seem like we might be, concentrating on it. Question is, do animals have this ability? Based on cross-species comparison of the default mode network, thinky part of the brain, between humans and non-hominid primates, macaques, marmosets, and something called a mouse lemur. Researchers report finding major dissimilarities in connectivity profiles. Most importantly, the medial prefrontal cortex, which I'm assuming is a part of the brain, the medial prefrontal cortex on the non-hominoid primates is poorly engaged with the posterior cingulate cortex, which is quite a diversion from human brains where activity between medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex is on fire. It is working when we're doing the thinky part of the brain and not engaging so much with the outside world. And this is from an international collaboration across 7 laboratories, 5 institutions, 3 countries, published in one journal, Cell Reports, led by Christos Konstantidis, professor of biomedical engineering, neuroscience, and ophthalmology, who says, surprisingly, our results showed that in all species other than humans, the brain areas that comprise the default mode network involve 2 systems not strongly connected with each other. These regions, once responsible for suppression of external events and one for more cognitive tasks, appear to be linked only recently in evolution. It is this linkage that may have facilitated the capacity for abstract thought that led to the rapid evolution of human cognitive abilities. So this was an unexpected finding. They actually thought they would find more of a archaic sort of blueprint for this than they did. Unexpected findings change the way we think about brain networks. Atypical patterns of connectivity between brain areas we have diagnoses for these. These neurodevelopmental disorders, mental illnesses can be attributed to lack of connectivity with different parts of brain networks. And, so they've got this. Now they understand that it's actually kind of unusual to have the connectivity in the first place for the humans. It might lead to future therapies or understanding how to treat diseases going forward.
So is this all based on the morphological presence or absence of a region or of the brain, or were they looking at how the brain worked as well?
They are looking at how the brain worked. and how it was interacting. We were looking at
Okay.
pew pew.
All right.
Probably not actually pewing firing neurons, but just what is it? Is it fMRIs? Is that when it's just general blood flow to a region?
Yeah, and it's just like a picture.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just asking because
You don't like the
I
result.
totally
I know.
no. I totally buy it. I mean, there's definitely stuff that we do that other animals don't. I get it. There's something special about our brain, and I'm happy to have it. I'm just curious when you lack what you think is a very clear evolutionary progression of the brain. Is it because, as we know when we damage our own brain, brains can kind of reorganize and serve different functions in different ways when their different shapes or parts are missing or whatever. And so I could see how just by looking at what we currently have and what other animals currently have, you could miss how it changed when the brain enlarged, when new areas of the brain grew larger, and then it kind of reorganized and reformatted how it worked. So I think that's the part that I always kind of struggle with studies like this, is that just because it's not visually organized in the same way doesn't mean it's not doing the same thing.
Yeah, and so this is about the connectivity between those regions, and less about, I think at least I didn't read anything that was talking about shape or function beyond that, but looking for that. The thing that occurred to me though is this network requires you to have downtime.
Yeah, it gets
Evolutionarily
tired.
speaking, you need to be able to have. This is internal thinking where you actually sort of shutting out. This is almost like the flow mode a bit, right? Where you can, like, you're reading something, so somebody's talking and you didn't hear what they said because you were busy reading a thing. It's shutting off the senses. If you're a macaque or a mouse lemur, maybe there's never a good time to do that. Maybe there is never a good time to really stop paying attention to the nature around you.
Blair is not
Whereas you,
agreeing with you.
no, you're not.
You think
There's
those
so many
little lemurs?
reasons why they live in large groups. So they take turns looking out. There's lots of time to chill. When they're sitting there and they're grooming each other, they're spacing out. It's like a repetitive task. They're not really paying attention. Also, any animal that's not foraging all day spends time just chilling, just just hanging out. That is a very common thing for animals to do. It's
Or so they appear. Maybe they're always paying attention to their
well,
surroundings.
if you heard a scary sound while you were in the flow, as it were, you would kind of right, and that's all they need to do is be
Yeah,
alerted to
yeah.
specific stimuli.
But yeah, apparently they're not. I mean, we may project that that a monkey is deep in thought while it's grooming. Maybe they're just not. Maybe they're really
They're
not.
really not. They're not
They're
thinking
just
about anything.
really not. Possible.
Perhaps there are things like planning to steal somebody else's food or, tasks that you're planning to do. These don't necessarily take the default mode network to achieve, and that the abstract thought that would be involved for other contextual thinking, the abstract thinking you're talking about. I think, therefore I am kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Maybe that's what it's
Yeah,
necessary for.
or just cave wall art where you're using symbols to communicate
Right?
Right.
language.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
yeah.
language is a tough one, but you're right about the for sure certain art and stuff like that. We don't
Yeah.
really see that.
Hey, Blair, you want to tell
Mm.
a story?
Oh yeah, let me tell you about some blood-sucking leeches
Yeah!
and how
I've
they're
been
going
waiting
to
for this one.
save the world. This is a study out of Harvard University looking at DNA samples extracted from the blood meals of leeches. They found that those DNA samples from leech blood, not actually the blood of the leeches, but the blood in the tummies of the leeches, that they could be used to find out which wild animals are present in a large protected area like national parks and that they can help establish leeches as surveillance instruments for animal conservation. Yes, I love this. And so they extracted from more than 30,000 leeches. They extracted DNA to survey over 80 species of vertebrates, including amphibians, mammals, birds, and squamates. That's a fancy word for reptile. And the leeches were collected over a 3-month period by forest rangers throughout the 260 square mile nature reserve in southern China. It's about 80 miles along the mountain ridge there. And leeches, they're abundant in tropical environments. So this works for tropical environments. We have to find something else for us temperate buddies. But they feed on a large range of animals, all the way from bears to mice. They are sit and wait parasites, I guess, predators. I don't know what you want to call them, but their sit and wait strategy means that pretty much wherever you collect the leech, if they carry the DNA of something, that thing was very close to where you picked up that leech. Those leeches are not moving very far. So you know they pretty much walked through or nearby that exact space where you picked up your leech. So that means your mapping can be very accurate. And they digest the blood very, very slow. So they can also get the blood from leeches 4 months after they fed on that animal and test the DNA. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that's a fantastic filter then.
Yeah, and they were able to find near threatened and threatened animals via their DNA in the leech samples. So they were able to figure out where they were hanging out, like Asiatic black bears, tufted deer, stump-tailed macaques, types of frogs. But they also found livestock DNA from cows, sheep, goats. That means that the farmland right along the edge of the nature reserve, there was probably some bleed over where where that means that the livestock was either crossing into the reserve where they were not supposed to be, or that there was actually an overlap in resource use between the livestock and these threatened animals. So that could be a really good monitoring tool to figure out if farmland is encroaching on degrading habitat, protected habitat, or if it's impacting those populations. So long story short, this is just kind of a proof of concept that leeches could be used to map species distribution, and that unexpectedly they found some really interesting insights just from this initial proof of concept. So there you go.
Because they're living, they're ecological blood bags.
Yes.
They're doing the blood
That's right, they are.
sampling, the DNA sampling that researchers can't do. And then
They
they're
are.
sticking around
right.
wherever they were.
Yes.
They're like, "Oh, I'm
Just
full. Let me drop off." I'm done now."
wild hypodermic needles just roaming free. They're there.
Oh.
They're ready for you, these blood bags. So yeah, this is something that researchers could go out. It's way better than a camera trap or anything that you could find out from just general observation. Sound traps, any of those things are not going to be as effective as actual DNA from a leech. So
yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there are any other animals that could be potentially used in this way. Of course, anything that sucks blood, like mosquitoes, potentially,
but
or
they fly.
but they
So
fly.
anything that
range.
flies,
So they're too maneuverable.
then
Yeah.
it's a way harder to pinpoint where they came from. So you'd have to find something that doesn't go very far, like ticks.
Ticks would be
could
good.
work, except that they do also move pretty far. So
Yeah, they can travel,
they're-
yeah. Like the leeches
They
got to be
travel
in
on
the water.
animals.
They got to be the animal
So
has
what we
to
need to
have
do
crossed.
is introduce leeches to no. Never mind. I won't
We're
even
not.
joke about it.
We're not introducing leeches to any environments where they're not already endemic.
Yeah.
But let's talk about life and where it belongs, where it got its start, how it got its start. How is the big question. So we've talked, and anybody who has studied evolution or even chemistry has probably heard of the Miller and Urey experiment from 1952, in which chemists took a gas filled flask and applied a spark of electricity meant to simulate lightning. And they came up with a whole bunch of molecules that are prebiotic in nature. They could have led to the evolution of life. There's a new study that has just been published that suggests that while that might still be part of the whole generation, the electricity may have been involved in all of this, our understanding of the early atmosphere now is much different than what we used to think, and where once upon a time we thought that the atmosphere was made up of methane and ammonia, and then it shifted. Things changed. And more than 300 million years into the start of this earth, you had just the chemical interactions led to a change in the atmosphere that led to a predominance of nitrogen and carbon, as far as researchers are aware. And so, thinking of it from that perspective, those molecules don't make lightning easy. It's not the same kind of environment, the same kind of atmosphere that you would have where it'd be like, yeah, methane and ammonia and lightning all the time. And there's just all these molecules getting started everywhere. And where you would just think there's this preponderance of life starting moments, potentially they were much rarer. That the nitrogen, the researchers say, Christopher Kohn, a scientist at National Space Institute at the Technical University of Denmark, said the nitrogen and carbon rich atmosphere, you need stronger electric fields for a discharge to initiate. And so the atmosphere needed about, according to their models, 28% stronger electric field for streamers, which are the precursors for lightning, to discharge. Because these gas molecules are less likely to bump into each other and build up electrical charges that would lead to lightning strikes. So, fewer strikes, fewer odds of prebiotic molecules getting their starts. So, they were looking specifically at these starting streamers and the probability of those and looking at that. And so now they're going to be starting to model whole lightning strikes, trying to couple that with early Earth atmospheric chemistry to give us a better idea of how prebiotic molecules that might have led to life came to be, which is pretty cool. And then on another note, even beyond the lightning, there has been evidence in rocks in Canada of life potentially starting sometime around 3.75 to 4.28 billion years ago. So long ago, but it was seriously, this Nature paper that was published a couple of years ago suggested that it was really like the Earth turned into a rock and then life started.
Boom. Life
It's
happened
like
immediately.
immediately, right? And so the people said, well, these rocks, the structures, they may not have been really it might not have been life. It just could have been rocks
Could have
doing
been
rock things.
natural formations that created the what looked like a growth pattern thingy on there, something having been there, but could maybe not be a bacterial colony. Maybe it was. And scientists debated this. I don't remember who won. I know I was rooting for life, but I don't know
Well,
who won.
I mean, life won. We're on the planet right now, which means life did win. Life finds a way. But there is now a new paper out in Science Advances investigating these bits of rock more closely. And so they have taken really tiny, fine slices of these bits of rock, assessed them to actually determine that they were as old as the old Earth and not just some new inclusion in older rocks. Yes, indeed, they're super old rocks. These are they're 3 to 4 billion years old. Um, so the rocks are the right age. And then additionally, they started looking into the structures within the rocks and they found in their CT scans and their really high resolution searching, they discovered that there were branches and like stem and branch patterns that were not the kind of thing that you would find from just chemical processes. And so they're finding more and more observational evidence of what looks like the kinds of structures that would be formed by microbial life, early microbial life. Additionally, the rock specimens and the molecules contained in them have molecules that seem that in their study they say are they're pretty obviously metabolic leftovers, that they are the leftovers of life activity in these rocks. So fossils, old fossils in the rocks, could be, and there is more evidence. It's been published. So again, hey everyone, this is a cool story. Was life with those limited number of lightning strikes? Did it really get started that early? The evidence is it's tantalizing. But we don't know yet, but it's very exciting.
Yeah, and it really this sort of finding to see life this early, or when it shows up later, which is still very early if you think about the how old the planet is, the 4-ish billion years of the planet. This is pushing it beyond 3 billion years back, but then even if it's only 3 billion, only if it's 2.5 billion, it's still, for something that we think of as such a freak accident of nature to come to exist. But if it isn't happening so quickly, then you can sort of see, like, with all the other planets that have the same chemical soup and the same physics that our planet has and the same interactions taking place, should happen there too.
Yeah.
There's no reason it wouldn't be happening all over the universe. That life might be much, much more common than we have assumed. Now, by common, of course, you have to still have somewhat Goldilocks-ish conditions,
Of course. Yeah.
perhaps.
Well, but that's
Perhaps.
assuming you have the same criteria for life to happen is the
Mhm.
only way. That's the other
Yeah.
problem. Is
No,
there,
but we only have one example, and that's why I
sure, but it's really hard for me to believe there's not others. But that's not the point of this. I do want to say this picture.
I'm
This
excited about the
picture-
James Webb though, because let's look at exoplanets and find
Yes.
this out.
Yeah.
Right?
Find
Okay,
somebody
what about-
waving back.
Yeah.
No, this picture is amazing. There's just these little circles and squiggles, and that means maybe life. And
Yeah.
I want to see a lecture from one of these scientists talking animatedly about these squiggles. I want it.
Tell me about what you see in these rocks.
Yes, tell me why these squiggles are exciting to you, because I know they're exciting. But to me, they just look like squiggles. I want to hear.
They look like rocks, but
Yeah.
these are maybe very special rocks, and maybe they're the earliest life on the planet, earlier than we even thought. The jury's still out, but let's keep figuring it out. All right, Justin, you have another story?
Yeah. Oh, I've got lots more stories.
Oh, yeah,
So,
maybe.
This one is published in the Frontiers in Microbiology. Microbiologists from Radboud University have demonstrated that it is possible to make methane-consuming bacteria generate electricity. Ooh, we have a very electric show today. The bacteria Candidatus methanopterendens use methane to grow and naturally occur in waters anywhere from ditches to lakes. They might be there with the leeches, just all over the place. According to microbiologist and author Cornelia Welt, in the current biogas installations, methane is produced by microorganisms and is subsequently burnt, which drives a turbine, thus generating power. Less than half of the biogas is converted into that power, and this is the maximum achievable capacity. We want to evaluate whether we can do this better using the microorganisms. So, sort of skipping the whole burning and turbining part and just going straight from organism to electricity. Of course, it sounds like impossible, right? You can't just hook up. First of all, they're so small, the bacteria. How were you even going to connect the cables? And then this is a microbiologist, Helen Auboter, who says we create a kind of battery with two terminals, where one of these is a biological terminal and the other is a chemical terminal. We grow the bacteria on one of the electrodes, to which the bacteria donate electrons, resulting from the conversion of methane. Through this approach, researchers managed to convert 31% of the methane into electricity, which is less than is achieved by the standard burning operations. But this is, of course, just the first time they've done this. So for a first run, it's an extremely good result. And they say they're going to focus on improving the system. Also, in their system, there's no burning of the methane.
Oh yeah, I mean, you said where are they going to put the electrodes? Where are you gonna hook it up? But I mean, it's a soup, right? It's a solution. The
You can just pull it
bacteria
out
are
of the
just
solution.
in solution, so it's like a jar of soup, and you put the electrodes into the soup, and then you let it go and let it do its thing. You have your cathode, your anode, you have your catalyst, and you have your methanogenic archaebacteria that are like, I'm gonna eat this up and suck up the methane and make electricity. I love it.
I mean,
And if you can make them if they can make them more efficient and make them on a larger scale, then suddenly you have real power generation. And it doesn't, and like you said, this proof of concept, this, homemade jobby, it's like what they've put together in the lab out of a couple of plastic jugs and bacteria and bits and pieces. I mean, you scale that up, you make it more efficient, and you put that into a plant that's producing methane. You have there's
well,
I don't
you
know.
put it into
my
a
bacteria powered car.
Yes.
You just stop at a red light and you just go slosh, slosh, slosh.
Slosh, slosh,
yeah,
slosh.
no, we've been talking about ginormous bioreactors, right? But this is sort of the thing that is sustainable. You can turn half of your bacteria into a magnitude more bacteria overnight, or many magnitudes perhaps. Like I mean, you can just grow them off of basically, sugar water and a couple of trace elements. This
Yeah,
is not.
instead of the gas station, you're stopping at the sugar water station. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly how it would work. And the it's sort of funny too, because it sounds like we have like all these steps in between, like, oh yeah, we need this ancient forest, and then it needs to get covered up, and then bacteria have to digest it and turn it into, and then you get oil or something there, or it turns into methane gas that can get pumped out, and then so we're like waiting for like millions of years for these bacteria to do the job. Well, we can just do it in real time. We can just do it just right there.
Yeah. There's another, not bacterial, but I think it's out of MIT, published in Nature this week, what they're calling a thermophotovoltaic cell that's been created. It's like they're saying it's more efficient than the traditional steam turbine. There's no moving parts, and it's little. It generates electricity from heat sources, so black body radiation heat sources like the sun.
Oh,
And it can
yeah.
generate electricity from a heat source of between 1900 to 2400 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of up to about 4300 degrees Fahrenheit.
Hot.
Super hot, really, really hot. So they can potentially incorporate this into solar setups, but any place that has white hot light, where that's producing light, basically white hot heat production, it can potentially get in there, and it's about 35 to 40% efficient. So
Mhm.
sustainability. I think this is a huge point that we need to keep pushing forward. These are the solutions. We are capable. We have technology. We just need to put them into action faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could 100%, if we pretended that gas was a resource that was somehow finite or subject to uh, global events, and was an unstable thing on which to plan economies. We could perhaps invest in technologies that were manageable, sustainable, not destroying the planet so much,
Oh, that doesn't
and be
sound
more
boom
reliable.
bust enough for
Sounds
people's
like a lot of
dark tetrad
well,
traits.
right, and then part of the problem, of course, is there's, and it's something I didn't even mention, where they said, "Oh, the energy sector will find this very interesting." I had to like think about what they meant by the energy sector,
Yeah.
because there is, there's bureaucrats in the world who are in charge of running a city, and they might have a municipal power plant, and they're like, I just need the energy sector to provide energy for the people. And then there's like mining and logistics companies who are like, I don't care what you do with the oil. You can turn it into plastic, you can run your car on it, you can just pour it into your rivers for all I care, as long as I got to mine it and deliver it and you bought it. I don't care. Like, they're not really in the energy business, and other energies are actually competition for their energy, their mining operations. So there's a lot that we have to rethink in how energy is handled as a utility, and not as a private business.
Oh, so many things. So many things. I agree with you there, but yeah, there's so many things we need to consider in this way. But oh, Blair, can you tell us what our porpoise is?
Oh, yes. The purpose of
Purpose
this
of life.
story is to tell you about a dolphin. And and why did the dolphin make a bunch of clicking sounds? It was to find her porpoise.
Oh.
This is yeah. So this is a very specific anecdotal. It's not even really a study. It's an anecdotal account that I want to tell you about. In the Firth of Clyde, which is a saltwater inlet in the west coast of Scotland, and it's home to many harbor porpoises. And the locals found out one dolphin. They named the dolphin Kylie, and they noticed that she often spent time interacting with the porpoises. So, some researchers from University of Strathclyde, they took some hydrophones, Scottish, dragged some hydrophones behind a yacht multiple times over the years 2016, 2017, and 2018. Normally dolphins make sounds by pushing air from their lungs through a structure that is called their monkey lips. It's a muscular structure that's similar to vocal cords in humans, and it creates the sound that we associate with dolphins, which is like putting air out of a balloon, a whistly sound. They can also make clicking sounds. They can do other things. Dolphins have a lot of sounds that they do, but their primary means of communication is the whistling. That's how they talk to one another. In listening to Kylie, she didn't whistle. She produced clicks similar to porpoise sounds. As they continued to listen, they revealed a back and forth communication of sorts between Kylie and some of the porpoises. They would hear pausing in between clicks from the porpoises and Kylie. It sounds as though they were listening to one another and then responding. The problem is, we don't know if she was making any sense. We don't know if she was really speaking porpoise. We don't know if she was just kind of like mooing at a cow like we do, or
Oh,
if
that's
they were
funny.
actually fully communicating.
Yeah.
They were confident that she was attempting to communicate in some way with the porpoises, but they don't know if she's been successful. Unfortunately, she has not been seen since 2018, so I don't know what the deal with Kylie is. Either she's, made it to the Great Blue Yonder or the Great Blue Yonder. We don't know. If she shows back up, I'm sure these researchers will be jumping out on a boat with a hydrophone once again. But in the meantime, this is our first indication of porpoises and dolphins attempting to speak to one another, which is pretty wild.
How different are they, really?
They're very closely related.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very closely related.
But
And this is
have chimps and bonobos talk to each other?
Right.
Can we talk to chimps?
No.
Yeah.
So it's
to some trainable degree, we can be trained to understand when they're hungry or when they're. I think there's some level
make
of
sounds back to them that they could understand, and vice versa.
You could make
they can't make human sounds to us.
You could try to mimic, but it wouldn't necessarily mean anything. And
the closest thing I can think about is parrots. Right? They can make human sounds. There have been arguments that they understand what they're saying, but they don't really formulate full language connections. They can't have a full back and forth conversation. So it's something that is kind of to this point unparalleled. That being said, it could be happening all over the animal kingdom and we just don't know because we don't speak the animal languages. So it's possible that rabbits are talking to mice and we don't even know,
everybody's talking. It's just the humans that never. They're
humans
so
never figured
hard to
anything
understand.
out. They're just friendly dolphins in the world.
They're
without
curious.
A porpoise.
I would say friendly is a tough one, but I would say
curious about their porpoise.
Yes, exactly.
For sure.
Yes.
Well, we are not curious about our porpoise because we know why we're here. We're here to talk about science. We're so glad that you're curious about science as well and that you're here to join in the conversation, to be a part of this program. Thank you for spending your time with us. If you are enjoying the show, please tell a friend. Share TWIS with someone you love today. All right, we're going to come back right now to a part of the show. Oh, wait, it's not really much of a switch, actually.
Yeah,
it's more of a continuation.
Continuing on.
Continuing
it was like an
on.
appetizer. It was an amuse-bouche.
Yes.
A porpoise amuse-bouche.
For Blair's Animal Corner with Blair.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
What you got, Blair?
I have chimps that know what you did.
What?
Uh-oh.
If it involves...
Chimps know what you did last summer.
If it involves a chimp skull, then they might. This is a study from Kyoto University looking at whether chimps can recognize chimp skulls. Chimps are known to interact with dead members of their species. They revisit corpses. They show mourning-like behavior. We see this in other animals too, like elephants. But in this study, they tested chimpanzees' visual attention to a series of images of conspecific and non-conspecific skulls, meaning chimp skulls and not chimp skulls. They used images of faces, skulls, and skull-shaped stones representing 4 different species. And they found that the chimpanzees seem to know when a skull is chimpanzee-like. They relate this to the phenomenon of pareidolia. I even looked up how to pronounce that before the show, and I forgot. Pareidolia is when you see faces and things. I was just talking to someone about this the other day. But so they think that that's what this is about, is that the chimps can analogize like the shape and features of the skull to kind of picture a chimp face in their mind's eye. That's what they think is going on. Might be a little bit of a stretch, but whatever. Anyway, that's what this study decided to specifically look at. They conducted a series of 3 experiments using an eye tracker to map where the chimpanzees were looking and how long they looked at certain parts of the images. Not only do chimpanzees show preference for chimpanzee faces, but they also show a bias towards chimpanzee skulls over other skulls. They spent the majority of their time looking at the teeth, which is interesting. This does not conclusively determine whether chimpanzees know that it is a chimpanzee skull, but they venture to speculate that when they find a skull, they will likely be attentive to it like no other inanimate objects in their surroundings, and that might have something to do with the fact that it resembles their own, and that it is could be a symbol of danger, could be a warning, could be just interesting because it looks like them. There's a million reasons that they might specifically focus on chimpanzee skulls. But based on this research, it looks like they do in fact differentiate chimpanzee skulls from other skulls.
So they looked at the chimpanzee skulls longer? Is that yeah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, so normally that's like a sign of novelty or something that but of course
But
it's also
so
interest, it's attention.
right,
I'm
it's
putting my
interest, it's
attention on this
attention,
thing.
and they're drawing a parallel to the fact that chimpanzees mourn. So that's also kind of like lingering. So
I do wonder because you said they spend a lot of time looking at the teeth. And so looking at, the bones of a skull, you're not really seeing features of, your friend Bill, who's not around anymore, but his teeth. He bared his teeth at you a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And so you're like, "Oh, wait, those canines, those
canines have
incisors.
threatened me before."
What?" Yeah.
Well,
Maybe those look
I don't know.
familiar. Yeah.
But it wouldn't need to be familiar, of course. It would just be like that's a threat. If you're seeing
The teeth,
another chimp's teeth,
Yeah.
you're somebody's not happy around you. Especially if you see
Yeah.
all of them like that, then they must really be like, whoa. Well, it's
So
not
this
moving.
is why whenever you go to zoos or nature preserves where there are monkeys, but definitely apes, you're not supposed to. You're supposed to cover your mouth if you're smiling. You're supposed to not smile big and wide at them, because that is a sign of aggression. Saying, "Look at my weapons."
And everybody who goes to a zoo and they see the chimps, they see the apes, they're like, "Look at them, they're so cute." And they're smiling and laughing and saying, "Hey, take a picture, smile next to the chimpanzees."
Which I'm sure an argument could be made that the chimpanzees get habituated to that. So like the apes in zoos are probably used to seeing humans smiling, and it's not as big of a problem. But if you see a chimp smiling at you in the zoo, that means they feel threatened and they are showing aggression towards you. So anyway, so from skulls to hearts.
Ooh, this is like I don't know. It's either I don't know. This is a horror movie. This is the primate horror films, or Shakespeare, or I don't know.
Edgar Allan Poe on one hand,
there we go.
and then in the other hand is just primate introspection. Know thyself. So we just talked about knowing the skull of their own species. I want to talk about knowing your own heartbeat. So this is a study out of UC Davis, and this is looking at rhesus macaques and if they are able to perceive their own heartbeats. Do you think without taking your pulse, you could recognize your own heartbeat?
No.
Recognize it? Yeah, sometimes. Like if I've been exercising, yes. Yes.
So I'm not saying notice. I'm saying
exercise
recognize. So both of you could, because you will recognize if your heart starts racing.
Yeah.
If it's beating very hard, but also humans in general, this is not even in the study, but I wanted to talk about it. Humans in general have a preference for a 60 beats per minute pace in music. And that is roughly
the average human heart rate.
The human heart rate. If you have music that is slightly faster or slightly lower, like if you have an 80 beats per minute, rate in a song, like I learned this from playing music, if you're trying to keep time at 80 beats per minute, it is extremely difficult because your body either wants to speed it up or slow it down to get it close to in sync with or double time with the human heart. So you are aware of your own heart rate, whether you realize it or not. It dictates things that you do and how you move and what you respond to. So
My heart can't tell me what to do.
it can. The heart wants what it wants, Kiki.
Okay, fine.
But so for this reason, I'm kind of throwing this whole study into question. But we'll talk.
Good.
So
this episode's about skepticism. Come on.
So they wanted to see if rhesus macaques could perceive their own heartbeats. There's reasoning for this beyond just, hey, are monkeys smart? It's because this is related to something called interoceptive awareness. Interoception is the self-monitoring of your physical systems. And interoception is something that humans do all the time unknowingly. That's why I was asking you about your heart rate. You're actually paying attention to it whether you realize it or not. Impaired interoceptive awareness is associated with anxiety, depression, mental health issues, and even potentially Alzheimer's. And so looking at what makes interoception happen, what animals have it and what animals don't, and how those systems are developed also then allows you to alter those systems in test subjects to be able to do research to help humans. So that's the background on this. Now, rhesus macaques, what they did is they monitored 4 of them. They sat them in front of an infrared eye tractor displaying stimuli. The stimuli bounced and generated a sound either synchronously with or asynchronously without the monkey's heartbeats. So it was either faster or slower. So they did both of those. So it wasn't favoring one or the other. And monkeys and human babies in other tests have looked longer at things they find surprising or unexpected, exactly what you mentioned, Kiki, before. So they will look longer at something unusual. All 4 monkeys spent more time looking at the out-of-rhythm stimuli compared to the in-rhythm. So they did sense an out-of-rhythm from their own heartbeats. This is consistent with similar studies with human infants. And so this is what they believe is the first behavioral evidence that rhesus monkeys have a human-like capacity to perceive their heartbeat and have an interoceptive sense. So they hope to use a similar model to study neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's, anxiety, and depression, and all sorts of emotional hindrances as well. So if they can measure interoception, they can track it as a behavioral biomarker to follow disease progression. So their next step is to study the mechanism that causes interoception, what in the body tells us what's going on with our heart, and what might be involved in psychiatric and neuropsychiatric conditions. Which one is causing the other? Is anxiety causing hindered interoception, or is hindered interoception causing anxiety? And so you have to kind of answer all these other questions first. It's very interesting. The thing I push back on is that it's hard for me to believe that this is not a basic animal thing, that you know your heartbeat. That I don't think this is so unusual to find it in monkeys. And I think if you look in other species, you will find them as well.
And I think the issue is that rodents are just different enough that it would be hard to do these experiments on rodents. And, as wonderful as rodents are for a model species, that it just kind of wouldn't work the same way. But other species, I'm going to guess that we just haven't looked at them yet. We haven't checked to see because it's relatively unstudied, because we have this, the human hubris of our own. We have our own internal environment and our internal lives. And of course, other animals can't be so complex.
Well, think about any mammal, any placental mammal started out in a womb. And there was a maternal heart rate
Heartbeat.
happening all the time.
Yep.
When you are taking milk as a baby, there is a maternal heart rate right next to your ear. And
feeling the vibrations through your small, chest cavity, right?
Mhm.
So your heart could, sync up in some way with that maternal heartbeat.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of heart rates, I think we are very hardwired to recognize our heart rate, to have a preference for a steady heart rate. And evolutionarily, it's helpful to know when your heart is racing.
Yeah, and
Also.
physiologically,
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense. Oh, I'm gonna pass out, or my heart is
Yeah.
racing too much. This is too, or maybe I need to get more excited. I'm gonna say that a lot of this interoception for for humans as well as for chimps, where if we sit and we think about it, we can go, yeah, okay, I'm aware of when my heart changes its speed. I know when it's speeding out, when it's slowing down, when there are weird fibrillations. People start to recognize those kinds of things once you become cued into it. But the rest of the time, we're probably very much like other primates in that, and other animals, in that it's unconscious, in that
Mhm.
it's just a part of our body has this internal sense, but we're not thinking about it.
Mhm.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah,
but then
and I think about my own anxious childhood and anxious adulthood, and how I for a long time was convinced I had asthma because I sometimes just couldn't breathe. And as an adult, I was like, "Oh no, that's anxiety." So as an adult, you recognize, "Oh, my heart's going really, really, really fast, and so I can't breathe, and I need to sit down, and I need to take deep breaths." But as a child, I was very bad at that, very bad at that. And so then you start to, then you can start to extract this into a larger evolutionary question of, is that a human thing that we've developed? Back to Justin's original story about what makes humans special, right? Are we extra good at that, or are we extra bad at that?
Well,
Right.
that's like a couple weeks ago. I was talking about I don't know, a gazelle getting chased by a cheetah or something, right? And it gets away from the cheetah and then goes back to eating grass. It's not saying an animal can't be traumatized, but the gazelle's kind of like if I got chased by a cheetah, I'd need some time to come back from my survival from being chased by a cheetah-ness. Gazelle goes right back to eating grass and doing whatever gazelles do when they're hopping around. So like there is part of our brain that communication from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex that's like jamming information in that direction. We can think about it, but we can't really talk back to the amygdala to say, "No, it's cool. There's no cheetahs chasing us anymore. We can relax," because our brain is still in one of these other networks of activities that are going on, still thinking about it. Amygdala is still hearing about it, still thinking about cheetahs. So we have some architecture that we've allows us to do abstract thinking and be sentient and do all these wonderful things with our brains. And there's some stuff that was there for just being an animal and running from cheetahs or chasing down prey that's still there but isn't functioning
Yeah, and we don't
for modern
necessarily,
society.
and I think that's kind of, part of it. We have this abstract modern society, and yet we have these very primal instincts, networks, things like interoception that aren't necessarily something that we need to be consciously aware of all the time, that, but that do help our survival, and that do help the management of our internal homeostasis.
But I think it is what is it? Somebody in the audience would know. Is it jungle that's 180 beats per minute?
Probably something
Is
like
it
that, yeah.
it's like 108 because
The
that music
techno, the super
is
fast techno.
very soothing to me. very soothing. And if it's actually triple
if it's
timing
180, then
to
that's like
60,
a
then it
multiple.
totally
Yeah.
makes sense. Then it totally fits in
Oh
the
man,
Blair's.
so I googled song 180 BPM and they're
Uh-huh.
almost all on running playlists, which is very funny to me because trying to get your heart rate up. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then get
There you
into
Yeah.
go.
flow, right?
Yeah,
Keep
there
going,
you go.
everybody.
But I don't
Get
think
in that
I
flow
now have
mode.
this weird feeling like the reason I find that super fast music relaxing now is that it's actually matching my heartbeat, which is not something that I would have
I think you should go
considered.
see a doctor.
Yeah, if
No,
that's
but
true,
I
you
mean,
might be a hummingbird, actually.
no, if it's
You
a
might be a
multiple of the 60 is what I mean.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
a triplet of the 60s gonna still be weird to your body.
To
You
me,
want
it's
an even
extremely
division of it
calming.
because it's we don't need to get into this completely. It's fine.
After
Don't worry about
show.
it. Don't worry about it.
After show.
But yeah, I wonder also then
Everyone,
if sorry.
this is This
I'll
Week
be
in
right back.
Science, and we thank you so much for joining us for another episode. Justin, where'd you go? It's your turn after this section. And I do want to say, if you really love this show and you want to help keep us going month after month, week after week, head over to twist.org and click on that Patreon link to choose your level of giving within our Patreon community. $10 and more per month, and we will thank you by name at the end of the show. Oh, and while you're over there at twist.org, click on the Zazzle link because we have some new goodies in the Zazzle store. You know you want a new pillow or mug or t-shirt. That's right. Support Twists. We thank you for all of your support. We really do. We can't do this without you. All right, so let me tell you about plants. I really do want to bring you some really interesting news about plants protecting themselves. So, there are a couple of very interesting aspects of this story that I I hadn't really considered previously that I get very excited about now that I have really thought about them. So, plants, they have an immune system. Have you ever really considered the fact that plants have an immune system, Blair?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Right. All right. You've thought about plants having an
Yeah,
immune
but that's
system.
because I think about them talking to each other too. I think about plants way more, I think, than the average person and their goings on.
Yeah, so you're thinking about the plants, you're thinking about, what they're doing in their immune system, but how do plants know when to get their immune system going? How do they know when they need to fight off a pathogen? Is it after something has invaded them, has gone past their cuticle, has gotten into their cells, they've been bitten, right? They've started to be eaten, their defenses have been breached.
Well, it's and so sometimes nearby plants will release chemical signals,
Chemical
right?
signals, yeah. But what about the rain? And this is where the story gets a little bit weird, is that we don't really think about all the microbes that the rain contains.
Yeah.
Every
Plant
raindrop,
probiotic.
Ugh.
every raindrop isn't just a clean drop of water. It has come from somewhere and is containing things, microbes that have been carried in the atmosphere and condensed into this droplet of water and have now dropped to earth, plummeted thanks to gravity. And then they land on a plant. And so then you have a microbe that could be bacteria, could be a fungus, and those little raindrops might get into a little nook or cranny and just kind of get in there. And like suddenly you have a fungus growing on a plant because it got moist and the plant is just going to die, right?
Oh no.
No, no,
No.
of course not.
It's healthy stuff.
Of
Plant
course not.
probiotics.
Yeah. Well, the plants have proactive systems in place. Researchers at Nagoya University, publishing in Nature Communications about their work, showed that structures on plants become activated by the droplets of rain themselves. And the plants then recognize rain as a risk factor for disease and
Oh,
protect themselves. They're trichome cells. They're these little hairs on the outside of the plants get bounced and wiggled by raindrops as they hit the plants, and the trichomes play a role in sensing rain as a risk factor, and they activate immune responses. So the rain then it activates these trichomes. The trichomes lead to increases in calcium concentrations in the cells, and the calcium concentrations change these G proteins and the signal cascades and all this thing. And then these, because of the calcium increases, the leaves are able to inactivate an immune suppressor molecule and get their immune system going. So they have this whole saying. It's like the hairs on your arm standing up when you hear scratches on a chalkboard. Oh no, something bad's about to happen. And then it's not your immune system necessarily, but your fight or flight response is starting to get ready to go. Scary, something stimulated. But they are getting all built up to protect themselves from the rain. Plants protect themselves from rain.
Hmm.
And this just
So
is wonderful to me.
this is interesting because I was like thinking, oh, but the bacteria, they're probiotic bacteria. I mean, the plants need them; they thrive with these.
Not
And
always.
because, well, yeah, because, and this is the extrapolation from a previous study where they had done sterile water and put it on plants and collected rainwater and put it on plants. And the plants that got the rainwater did much better.
Hmm.
They grew better. They were healthier plants.
Hmm.
And their extrapolation is, this is likely because there's a probiotic effect for the plant microflora that's on it, and it's getting something that it doesn't get anywhere, which could be. But this is a mechanistic study, which is then
Mhm.
sort of saying that it's a by activating, maybe it could be then also extrapolating, also speculating, because it could be the probiotic thing, could be a thing, but it could also be that the plant's immune system just getting woken up makes
Mhm.
it thrive better
Yeah.
for other. So yeah,
It's
really
reminding me of in a way, of the dishwasher study, right? So if you have your
How's
kid
that?
in a very hermetically sealed home, then when they finally get exposed to things, they have problems with it. But if you let things get a little dirty, then you're exposing your child, then they're less likely to develop allergies. That's an allergy thing is a little different, but it's kind of like that, right? It's like sending your kid to school and letting them get exposed to other sicknesses as opposed to the last 2 years. And then you send your kid to school and they get sick immediately, right? This is
Yeah.
what I was very afraid of. Is the second I took my mask off, I was going to get sick because I used to be sick all the time, and then I kind of like developed an immunity, and then so I'm wondering if that's what this is too. Is it's like it's working the muscle of the immune system. It's making them fight little bits of things off so that when the big stuff comes, they're pumped.
Right. And they're
could
ready
be,
for it. Right. They're
could
ready.
be.
I don't know. But I love how all these pieces come together. It's like, whoa, plant immune systems and they're protecting themselves from the rain, and the rain is triggering it. And I will never think of the rain the same again. And then Justin, I did have to bring another story to kind of drop it back around to uh, the brain networks, and a
Mm.
study that suggests that babies, it was on not baby monkeys but baby humans, looking at
Baby people.
newborn brains. Yeah, these functional MRIs of baby brains. Researchers at Ohio State University have just published in Neuroimage their fMRI scans of 267 newborn babies, most of which were less than a week old. So these babies have had
Wow.
very little exposure to stuff outside the womb, and they were scanned for 15 minutes while they were asleep. So the default mode was not active. They weren't engaging in abstract thought of any kind. But what's very interesting is that we don't really know a lot about which networks, like you mentioned, there's motor networks and sensory networks, and there's the default mode network. And, from this particular study that you talked about earlier, humans have this default mode network, which allows us to have abstract thought, not something that primates have, right? So what aspect of our brain development is genetic and what's there from the very beginning and what develops as a result of experience and exposure during our lives. Because we know that there's, you're born and you have this massive explosion of growth of cells and
Mhm.
dendrites and connections within the brain while you're growing, and then it gets pruned back and it gets all chop 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 chop, gets chopped and pruned, and then you have your adult brain and all the networks are there, but they're not all there from the very beginning. And this particular study showed that newborn brains have 5 of the 7 brain areas that are found in adults. Newborn brains have active visual, default mode networks, sensory motor,
Hmm.
ventral attention, and high level vision networks. They're there from within the first week of after being born, probably there from prior to that. But what this suggests is that there is these are genetic. These are there from the get-go. This is human, right? This is all wired in to
What
start. That
what are the other two?
you need it to start. The other
What's
networks,
missing?
the 2 that are missing are control networks and limbic networks, and these are associated with
Mm.
higher level functions and emotions. And so little babies have very little emotional control and
Yeah,
very
that makes
little
sense.
cognitive control. They're not controlling their thoughts, they're not controlling their emotions.
Mm.
And
That
so those
makes sense.
networks aren't there. But while we know that babies don't really see well immediately upon birth, and it takes several
That's what I
months
was
to get
looking
the
at.
eyes to actually to start working, really,
They
the
yeah,
network
the
is there.
distance of their vision is very limited in the beginning. They
Yeah,
have
but
it. They have the vision, but you got to be right up there.
the network is there. The brain
Mhm.
network is there and ready to go. Whereas humans, we really need to develop our emotional control and our cognitive control. How we use our brain, how we think, how we control our ourselves in social situations. These don't come naturally. So I think it's really interesting. Also, what they're suggesting is that these networks, there's a lot of variation, you know, in the brains of the babies to start with, but all these networks are there. So there's individual variation, but then especially when it comes to things like emotion and cognition, cognitive control, those things, because they're independently experience based, there's going to be much more variation between individuals. And those can be affected by experience, by the environment during the lifetime of the individual much more.
Mm. Hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, really interesting looking at, genes versus
Mm.
environment,
Mhm.
what's there to begin with versus what has to develop in humans. But the default mode network, it's there from the
Yeah, I
get go.
love it. Abstract
Yeah,
abstract
Very
thinking
cool.
Bambininis.
right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but yeah, they have the potential, not necessarily having the potential to control their emotions, but potential for
It's tough. I
abstract.
get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Justin, tell me a
Yeah.
couple of stories. Let's wind this show up.
All right. DNA, which some of you may have heard of before. This is from ancient human remains unearthed at the Bakokiro cave in Bulgaria. They did some analysis to see who some very ancient people were. I think these are, oh god, they're like many, many, many thousands of years old. It doesn't say it right here. I think this is around. This is very ancient DNA, but I'll have to look it up later. Study published in Genome Biology and Evolution found that they were more closely related to contemporary East Asians than contemporary Europeans. And I think these are like 40,000-year-old remains. That's crazy. So this is in Bulgaria. Population, ancient remains found in the cave, much more closely related to East Asians today. than they were to Europeans. So they tried to solve this mystery. They were looking at the wider context of Eurasian Paleolithic human genomes. Study was led by Leonardo Vellini and Professor Luca Pagani, sorry. We got Bambini in that. From the University of Padova, collaboration with some other folks. So the scenario the authors are putting forward is the populating of East and West Eurasia, so Europe versus China and Southeast Asia, that area, was done over several waves of expansion from a single population hub. Now, what's interesting is they have no idea where this hub is. There's a population, this hub of people that seem to keep reaching out into Europe. They find them reaching out into East Asia, usually unsuccessfully. So this is okay. So while there were earlier Homo sapiens expansions more than 45,000 years ago, they all seemingly failed. There's only one representative of that migration that they've really found that is related to neither the modern Europeans nor the modern Asians. It's somewhere in the Czech Republic. They found some remains that weren't part of that, and they don't know how widespread that was. Then around 45,000 years ago, this is quoting Leonardo Vellini, around 45,000 years ago, a new expansion emanated from the hub and colonized a wide area spanning from Europe to East Asia and Oceania. So it just went everywhere and is associated with a mode of producing stone tools known as the initial Upper Paleolithic. So we've got the same kind of tool use all the way in Europe, all the way in Oceania and South and East Asia. And it's genomically linked to these are the same people who are from the same hub of population. So the fate of those settlers was then different in East Asia and Europe. In Europe, they endured for a while, and the other way around. The East Asia, they endured, they survived. They led to modern day populations in East Asia. The European shoot, they declined, and then they pretty much disappeared. And ended up, there's this one that they found in Baco Kiro. And there's another one in Romania, I think, that they have that looks like it's also of this early peopling of Europe. But then they just failed. They just didn't make it. This is Giulia Marchiani from the University of Bologna, co-authored the study. It is curious to note that this is around the same time the last Neanderthals went extinct. And it says, finally, one last expansion occurred sometime earlier than 38,000 years ago and recolonized Europe from that, again, same population hub, whose location, though, has yet to be clarified, say the authors. So although even in Europe, there were occasional interactions with survivors of the previous waves, an extensive and generalized admixture between the two waves only took place in Siberia, where it gave rise to a peculiar ancestry known as ancestral North Eurasian, which is interesting. So now they're determining there are these different waves coming from this one population, and two of those waves meet and they become ancestral North Eurasians, which if you've been tracking some of the segments I've done on this show over the years, this is the population that is most closely linked to Native Americans and is thought to be the direct ancestors of the Tarim Basin mummies in the Silk Road. So this is a mysterious, and it's still kind of interesting too, because this population, I think the oldest representative that they have dated thus far is about 20,000 years ago, which is still earlier than we have signs that there were folks in the Americas that are even older than that. So it looks like this population met somewhere in Siberia, these two waves of peoples leaving a mysterious hub that we don't know where they're originating. They leave, they go off, they evolve over some thousands of years, they meet up again, and then so anyway, it's a very fun find because it's sort of tying in together this one offshoot dead ender that they found in a cave in Bulgaria is sort of helping fill in the pieces of this mystery population of humans that's been going around the world. The last story today, in our show,
Cool.
part of the show, space balloons. But before I jump right into space balloons, telling you the whole story, we're going to cover the entire history of ballooning. So
What?
starting in 1783, a French science teacher, Jean-Francois Pilatre de Rosière, made the world's first hot air balloon and then launched it with a sheep, a duck, and a rooster on board.
I did a report on him in my French class in college.
Oh, nice. So then it was successful. The balloon lofted high up into the air. It was up there for about 15 minutes, and then it gently crashed back to the ground. 2 months later, that same de Rosière himself went up in a balloon. And this was an event, huge event. The King of France even showed up to watch this balloon launch. It was such a big deal. De Rosière managed a solid 25-minute ride this time, may have reached an altitude of 3,000 feet, which is really insanely high for, there's the highest anyone had ever been on the planet. And then an altitude, and then landed 5 miles away from where he started, which might have been a little, you're like, oh, hey, the king is there. It was like, he's going to shake my hand, but now you're 5 miles away and he's gone. 2 years later, de Rosière died crossing the English Channel when his experimental hydrogen balloon exploded 30 minutes into the crossing.
Hydrogen has a habit of doing that.
Yeah, which he was a chemistry and physics teacher, so it's kind of surprising that he made that big of a mistake. That's pretty bad design. So because of that, though, pretty much the world forgot about ballooning for 154 years. There is a little bit here and there. For 150 years, though, it's not. Nobody's talking about balloons, traveling in balloons to go anywhere. Until it was used as passage back to Kansas in 1939 by the Wizard of Oz. So that may have inspired some people, because people who were kids around that time, back in the then in the 50s and 60s, the hot air ballooning sort of had another wave, and people started doing this recreationally. And there have been many firsts. There have been many accomplishments. There's been crossing of the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans in ballooning. But in terms of travel, it's really never caught on because the airplane came along. And that's way more efficient, way more practical. So people just use airplanes for travel. And it's the best way of traveling, unless the only direction you're interested in is up. In which case, balloons have some advantages. Balloons have been considered, and we were talking in the pre-show, I had a friend who they were looking at balloons, high altitude balloons that could be used as platforms to launch satellites. The further away you are from the surface of the Earth, gravity is dropping off like by half by distance. And so you get up there, and the amount of fuel you need to launch a rocket the rest of the way to put a satellite in orbit is significantly reduced just by taking a balloon up. Now, part of the problem with that, though, is the temperatures in the atmosphere. When you get up there, unmanned altitudes of 53 kilometers have been achieved. You can really get up there. So, but now we got space tourism going on. So there's a company that's eyeing ballooning for space tourism, is what they're calling it. With an offer
to get kind of toward the edge of space, like as high as balloons will get us.
So yeah, depending on who you ask. There's an international standard. There's an American standard. It's anywhere from like 80 to 100 kilometers up.
Yeah.
Around 50, 60 miles, depending on what you're looking at, is where they consider space is. And so a lot of these space tourism things are just kind of going up over that and then coming back down again in these rocket launches that are being done privately. This is not that high. This balloon is going to reach an altitude of 30 kilometers. So not quite space, but it's 3 times higher than a commercial airline flight is going to be, which is pretty significant. This is getting up. This is curvature of the Earth in the distance. This is an amazing view, and they've got such a cool little pod here. So there's a little luxury cabin, they're calling it. The company is Space Perspective. They've put out some pictures of this fancy cabin. It has 1.5 meter tall windows, super comfy looking seats, complete with drink holders, a space lounge with bar, and the
That's
ability to
always
wander
important.
around the cabin, looking out windows in any direction. The flights offer longer time at altitude than most. So it only climbs at 19 kilometers per hour, so it's about 2 hours up. Then you do 2 hours of just sort of hanging out, gliding, looking out the windows, hanging out at the bar, and then there's a 2-hour voyage back down, and it ends with the adventure of an ocean splashdown.
That does sound like an adventure.
That's the way I put it.
Claire, you're muted. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say I was pretty interested until right now. I was like,
Yeah,
I was very into it. I was like, oh yeah, it's just like a giant elevator that goes really high. I would do that. It's like, oh no, you're gonna feel like you're falling at the end.
Well, it's 19 kilometers an hour. That's not too fast. I mean, I feel like
Faster
you
than
won't
an
ever
elevator, for sure.
you won't ever get like zero gravity stuff going on with this. It's not going to
No.
be. It's not going to be a drop. You're not going to get dropped down to there. You're
Right.
gonna
Because it's going to
slowly
be
go down.
controlled because it's a balloon.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so unless something were to happen, yeah.
Yeah. So, but we've got the picture of the cabin up here for those watching there. That looks really cool.
Looks fun.
Like that, I would be much easier. It'd be much easier to convince me to try that than going up on one of those firecrackers that they're putting people up on.
Yeah, I don't know about yeah. Rockets they're explosive. There's a lot of
Yeah, it's
lot of
at 30 kilometers, and that's a great infographic there. That is above 99% of the atmosphere.
Yeah, I
So
mean it would be
ju-
high enough that you'd really be getting out of
Yeah.
a lot of the atmosphere. You'd be at the edge of the stratosphere and the mesosphere. You'd be, or you're getting up there, but I mean, you'd see a lot. And people
Yeah.
do, go to the top of tall buildings all the time. And if you've got the money to do something like this, what a day, right? That would be,
Yeah,
what a
it's a
weekend trip.
full-on day trip. Yeah.
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 So I wanna make one addendum to your history of the balloon, because I was like, de Rosier, that doesn't sound right. The word for hot air balloon in French is montgolfier, and that's because he was the original person who invented the
Nope.
balloon. So he
No,
invented
no,
it
no.
6 months prior. So he and his brother, the Montgolfier brothers, did their test in June, and de Rosier did their tests his test in November. So
No.
yeah, so at
Who
least
got the scoop?
that's my understanding of the beginning of the
So,
balloon, because I was like, that's not what I
so-
remember from my report. So I looked it up as I found
So Molière, okay, so
the things you
Molière,
learn in a French minor. Right?
yeah. So Molière, you're right. They did design.
Montgolfier.
Montgolfier did design. I think the balloon that might have blown up. Even they designed they built the balloons for de Rosier, but they were actually the first to cross the English Channel in a balloon. So they do have some historical note too. But they were builders. I don't know that they invented or designed. I think that is still de Rosier, but they definitely worked together and were on at least a couple of flights, balloon flights together. So they weren't in a competition.
Different history books say different.
Okay.
Okay, everybody.
There.
Homework assignment.
Yeah. Yeah, let's
Claire,
see. Let's see
Justin,
who's right.
I expect dueling reports next week.
Okay, mine will be in French. So
Oh,
Ça,
yeah,
c'est
so
bon.
we can't. Oh, maybe we can.
J'aime beaucoup le français. Oui,
Ouais.
c'est bien, c'est bien. Ah, la science!
Ah, did we do it?
C'est fini.
C'est
Ah.
fini. C'est le fin
C'est
de
tu.
le show.
Oui.
We have come to the end of another show. Thanks for some great stories and great conversation there. That was a fun one. And everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in Science. I do want to give the shout outs to Fada. Thank you so much for doing show notes and show descriptions, social media. Really appreciate that. Identity 4, thank you for recording the show. Gord, Arenlor, others who help keep the chat room clean and happy and a nice place to be. Thank you for making that happen. Rachel, thank you for editing the show and for your additional assistance. And as always, thank you very much to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you to Teresa Smith, James Schofer, Richard Badge, Kent Northcote, Rick Loveman, Pierre Velazarb, Ralphie Figueroa, John Ratnaswamy, Carl Kornfeld, Karen Tazi, Woody MS, Chris Wozniak, Dave Bunn, Vegard Shefstad, Hal Snyder, Jonathan Stiles, a.k.a. Don Stylo, John Lee, Ali Coffin, Maddie Perrin, Gaurav Sharma, Ragan, Don Mundus, Stephen Alberon, Daryl Myshak, Stu Pollock, Andrew Swanson, Fredus 104, Sky Luke, Paul Ronovich, Kevin Reardon, Noodles Jack, Brian Carrington, Matt Bass, Shauna Neal Lamb, John McKee, Greg Riley, Mark Hessenflow, Gene Tellier, Steve Leeseman, a.k.a. Zima, Ken Hayes, Howard Tan, Rich Christopher Rappin, Dana Pearson, Richard, Brendan Minish, Johnny Gridley, Remy Day, Flying Out, Christopher Dreyer, Artyom, Greg Briggs, John Atwood, Rudy Garcia, Dave Wilkinson, Rodney Lewis, Paul, Philip Shane, Kurt Larson, Craig Landon, Mountain Sloth, Jim Trapeau, Sue Doster, Jason Olds, Dave Neighbor, Eric Knapp, E.O., Kevin Parachan, Aaron Luthen, Steve DeBell, Bob Calder, Marjorie, Paul Disney, David Simmerly, Patrick Pecoraro, Tony Steele, and Jason Roberts. Thank you all for your support of TWIS. And if you are interested in supporting TWIS on Patreon, please head over to twis.org and click on the Patreon link on next week's show.
We will be back Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific Time, broadcasting live from our YouTube and Facebook channels, as well as from TWIS, twis.org/live.
Hey, do you want to listen to us as a podcast? Perhaps as you fly your latest weather balloon? Just search for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, get your friends to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes as well as links to stories are available on our website, www.twis.org, and you can sign up for a newsletter.
You can also contact us directly. Email Kirsten at kirsten@thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistmanian@gmail.com, or me, Blair, at blairbaz@twist.org. Just be sure to put TWIS, TWIS, in the subject line, or your email will no longer have a porpoise, and it'll be absorbed by a pod of dolphins.
Oh, that was a good one.
You can chirp at us there at the Twitter if you like, where we are at Twist Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jack's Flying, at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week. We hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week science. This week in science. This week in science. This week in science.